Hi, welcome to one of two lectures this week. This week we're talking about system software, and there are two types of system software. One is the operating system, the other is utility programs. Both of these programs or systems are extremely important in the functioning of a computer. This particular lecture is focusing on the operating system. An operating system is a set of instructions that has all of the components of the computer working together and coordinating all of the activities. So it coordinates the different applications that you may have open. It coordinates the peripheral devices, your output devices such as the scanner, that's an input device, such as your printer, your speakers. It also helps coordinate the input devices, whether that is a camera, your keyboard, or any of the other types of input devices that we talked about. A system utility or a utility program, on the other hand, helps to analyze, configure, optimize, and maintain a computer. In other words, it's what helps your computer run more effectively and efficiently. The utility program is more focused on how the computer is operating, not specifically what it is doing. That's the job of the operating system. So the operating system does a lot of different things. It starts and shuts down the computer. It provides the user interface. So the way that you particularly interact with the computer is the operating system. It manages the programs that you load onto your system. It manages memory. It knows when to swipe out memory, when to, and what memory to use. It also helps to configure and manage the tasks for your external devices, such as printers and scanners and things like that. It establishes the internet connection. So every time that you connect to the internet, that is the operating system that is allowing that connectivity. It monitors performance. It knows how much CPU resources you're using. It knows how much memory you're using. It knows how fast your internet connection is or your network connection. It knows exactly how much data you're transferring back and forth. So it monitors all of those activities. It also provides management and other utilities. Those are the system utilities that we'll talk about in the next lecture. All of those updates that you get on your system every time you turn it on and it says you need to reboot or you need to install an update, that's the operating system providing that information and those updates for you to install. It also controls the network itself. So when your system is on the network, it controls when packages are sent, when packages are brought back to it or received. So all of that interaction on the network is controlled by the operating system. And finally, it administers security. In other words, it controls or maintains your username and password and other information that is used to keep your system secure. So some of the functions of the operating system we mentioned earlier. One of them is starting and shutting down the computer. Starting a computer can also be called, or is also called, booting. There are two types of booting. One is a cold boot. And a cold boot is when the computer has been completely shut down. There is no power going to the system at all. And you have to push the on button in order for the computer to start. A warm boot is basically your restart. You're restarting all of the applications and most of the functions within the CPU. However, you still have power supplied to the system. A lot of your update installs require a warm reboot, or a warm boot, or a restart of your computer. You don't have to completely shut it down and bring it back up for that to work. So, how does a computer's, the boot drive. The boot drive is where the computer gets the information in order to start up the computer. So your boot can come from a boot disk, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a physical disk. It can be a partition on your hard drive, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. You can also come from a recovery disk. So if your boot drive or that partition on your hard drive gets corrupted and the computer can no longer access it in order to start it up, the only way that you're going to get that computer to start up again is to use a recovery disk. So those are the two places that boot information can be housed. So how does a computer start? What are the steps and the sequences? Well, first, the power supply has to signal that to the system components to wake up. So once you turn on the power, it sends a signal out to all of the components, the CPU, the CU, the ALU, different memory, all of your adapters, the power, or not the power, but the fan, the cooling fan. So it sends a message that, hey, guys, wake up, it's time, we're going to start working. So once that occurs, the processor then finds the read-only memory or the ROM chip that contains the BIOS. And the BIOS is basic input and output system. It is the basic instructions that the computer has in order to do the basic functions. I know that's really redundant. So once it finds the BIOS and wakes up the BIOS then performs a power on self test, or a post. And it goes through and it says, okay, CPU, are you ready? Check. ALU, are you ready? Check. Hey, adapters, are you ready? Check. Do we have memory? Yes. So it goes through and does a check of all of those things. Once it completes that check, then it takes the results of that system check and compares it to data on the CMOS chip. And the CMOS, well, CMOS stands for Complementary Metal Oxide Semiconductor. And the CMOS chip contains information about the status and the settings of the computer when it was last shut off. The results of the post test are then compared with the data from the status that the computer was in when it was last shut off. If everything matches up, then we go on to the next step, which is that the BIOS looks for the boot program. So now we've decided that everything on the computer is fine, and we are now ready to boot. So we go and look for that boot drive. The boot drive is generally on your hard drive. Hard drives are very large, and we do what we call partitioning, which means we block off separate, we divide the hard drive into different partitions or segments. One segment in particular that is generally called the A drive is where the boot information is stored. Typically the only information or the only data, the only thing stored on that A drive is the boot information. Your stuff, your files and programs and things like that are usually stored on what we call the C drive, and that's the largest portion of most drives. You can divide the drive up further if you want, and when we start looking at storage, we can talk about that more. So once it finds the boot drive, then it loads all the system files into RAM from the hard drive or from the boot drive. Then it goes, and once all of that stuff is loaded, the OS then loads configuration information onto the desktop. So that is all of the settings that you have for your preferences, your screen brightness, how loud the system is, the files that you want on there, what programs are listed right on the desktop. So all of your preferences, the way that you like your system to look and feel, are loaded onto the system. So then once we start up the computer, then we also have to shut down. And there are two ways that the computer can shut down. One is, well, actually there's three. You can totally power it off. So you've hit the power button, or you've done a complete shutdown so no power is getting to it. You can go into sleep mode, or you can go into hibernate. Sleep mode is different from hibernate in that there is a little bit of power that still continues to go to the system, so that when you open it back up, then your stuff is all of there. It doesn't save everything and put it in a down state. It just continues to get electricity in there and keeps it slightly powered up. The hibernate saves any programs and documents to hard drive first, and then it removes the power. So this is slightly different than powering it completely down because the time to boot doesn't take quite as long. Sleep mode is you've just kind of shut the top on your laptop. It automatically saves some stuff for you, but there's still power running to it. Okay, after we shut down, we've got different types of user interfaces. So a user interface is some way that you interact with the computer. Most of you interact with a Windows application or a graphical user interface. That's where we have the icons and the pictures and the dialog boxes that we interact with the computer with. The other way that you can interact with the computer is through command line. And command line is you use a keyboard to do everything. So you use a keyboard to navigate through your file folders to where you're saving information. That's how you copy, you delete, you paste, you type all of those instructions in. It's sort of, you can kind of look at it as programming because a lot of the syntaxes in order to do that comes from programming. Command line interfaces are not intuitive, unlike graphical user interfaces. There is one other way that is used for interfacing, and that is called menu driven. And in menu driven, it's exactly what it says. There's a screen and it says, do you want to go to accounts payable number 1? Number 2, do you want to go to HR? Number 3, do you want to go to the student access or student system? And then what you do is you put like a 1 on a line, and that will take you into the accounts payable. And then you have another menu. Do you want to send a bill? Do you want to update a contact? So every time you want to do something, you select a number off of a menu and enter that into the computer. Now, the next thing that we do is that we look at how programs handle your productivity. So what are the different things that the operating system can do? It can do a single user or multi-user mode. Single user, as it states, is there's only one person that uses it at a time. That's it. There's only one person on the system. Multi-user, there's multiple people on it. Single tasking and multitasking is the same thing. There are some systems that you can only do one thing at a time on. There are other systems that you can do multiple tasks or you can have multiple windows open at the same time. It used to be that PDAs and things like Blackberries were only single tasking. That's changing rapidly with the advent of smartphones. It helps determine what's in the foreground, what's in the background in running. Preemptive multitasking means you're doing a task and it will interrupt the previous task instead of letting it finish. And then there's multiprocessing. So we've got lots of processes running all at the same time. Now, the other thing it does is it does memory management. It optimizes the use of the RAM and the virtual memory. So it manages all of that stuff as far as memory, when we're using it, how much we're using it, what type of memory we're using. That's the function of the operating system. Okay. The next thing that it does is it also determines the order in which tasks are processed. So if there's multiple things going on in the computer, it's the operating system that determines what task is going to be performed when and how it's to be performed. Do we receive the information out of storage first? What documents need to be printed? If we queue up documents into a print queue, it's the operating system that is determining in which order the documents are coming in. Especially when we're looking at one on a network, it's the operating system that says Jane got hers in here first, then Bob, so that's the order that we're going to be printing them in. Okay, there's several other functions that we have. But this particular lecture capture software only allows me to do 15 minutes of lecture. So I'm going to stop here and